This is probably by far our most popular talk. We've done several kind of iterations of this. This is this year's iteration. There will be several other talks that we'll do that Kelly Goldsmith, our marketing person, will send out and let you know. And you could send something, it's not important to be live in person, or you can watch the recording. So like I said, if you have questions, just put that in the chat. I'll stop from time to time and check. And then when we get to the end, also can answer questions that way if you want to put in the chat or if you want to unmute yourself. So what we're going to talk about is the problem and frame it around anxiety. What anxiety does to our body. We're going to talk about body, mind, and body and make them interconnected, one and the same. Risk factors that make us more vulnerable to anxiety. First, so things that make us more resilient to anxiety, tools and ways to fight anxiety, which I'm sure everyone's interested in, and then some resources for you that you can use to kind of hopefully solidify all these things that we're saying. So basically the problem with anxiety, if you yourself or if you have a loved one that has anxiety, you know this very well. It's hard to negotiate with it. So, the things that we talk about in the practice is trying to differentiate between what is a real problem, the probability of something becoming a problem, and something that feels like a problem. Because anxiety is coming from this place deep inside of us, and it's designed to keep us safe. It's designed to allow us to continue to be around. So it's all coming from a lot of times a very unconscious place in our brain, particularly. And so a lot of times these feelings, it's hard to say with 100% certainty that, this won't happen or that won't happen. So that's why it can be hard if you have a loved one to really try to talk them out of that because, very rarely are things in life 100%, and anxiety is wanting 100% accuracy rate, or it will do something or not do something. So what we're trying to think about is, what is worry? And so we use this language, what is worry versus anxiety? And worry is something that is a real problem or has a high probability of becoming a problem. So, a real problem could be a car coming in your lane, or it also, the probability of something becoming a problem is, since school has started, they're in for a couple weeks, unless you're in South Carolina, it's a couple more weeks, but, the grades may not be going the way that they want. And that is potentially a problem or could become a problem depending on the grade that individual or the caregivers want them to have. And so that is a worry. That's something that needs your attention. So the car coming in your lane obviously needs your attention right away. But a grade not trending in the direction that person, that student, or that caregiver or both are wanting is something that needs to be addressed. Maybe it's going to tutoring, maybe it's extra studying, maybe it's talking to the teacher, maybe it's a bunch of different things. But worry has action steps. And so sometimes in the practice, we'll deal with those worries because not everyone understands what the action steps need to be, how to solve that problem. Anxiety is everything else. Anxiety is something that tells you that this is a problem. It could become a problem. You need to give a lot of attention, a lot of detail to it. So it's coming from that same neural kind of pathway development, the amygdala area, if you want to think of it that way. That's saying, hey, this is a threat, and this is a threat to us. This is an existential crisis to us, and we need to pay attention to it. So it can be something that's very mundane to us that someone doesn't have anxiety, but it could be someone, making a comment about them, or someone thinking someone can make a comment about them, and you can't know for sure. For certainty, if I raise my hand and get the question wrong, that someone won't make a snicker or roll their eyes or even say something about me or put something on social media. So you can see how this narrative goes and can get spun up. And so anxiety is playing off of that same pathway system that worry is playing off of. So that's why we differentiate between the two, between worry and anxiety. Anxiety is something that is more of a feeling, and worry is a feeling mirrored with data, facts, and something that we can really think about and say, all right, here's the things to do. We'll talk about what to do with anxiety later on, but just to understand there's two differentiations. Certainly the problem with anxiety, as you can see, it rose exponentially during COVID. It has come down, but it hasn't come down to pre-COVID numbers. And so just generally it's 27.5%. Between the ages of 18 and 24, it's 50%. Between The latest study on teenage girls, and this is a big study, it was 60% are feeling anxiety persistently each day. Obviously it is a problem. It is impacting a lot of people. And anxiety isn't nervousness. It's not, fear. You can have stress without fear, but you can't have fear without stress. It is stress and fear combined together to create a problem that makes you think you need to act or not act. And so it's starting to trick you, and we'll talk about what it does and how it does it here in a minute. So, what's happening to the body? You've got signs and symptoms. Signs are measurable. So, if this kiddo came to you today and said, "Hey, I'm not feeling well," you'd probably get out a thermometer, you put your hand to their head, that kind of thing, see if they're hot, and then maybe back it up with a thermometer to see, what is their temperature? Do they have a fever? And so those are simple things like, Charlie Brown hair sweating. That's things those are signs we can measure them. If you're talking fast, if you have dry mouth, if you're having a GI issue. And then you have symptoms, which are sometimes, they're more subjective. So if your kiddo came to you and said, "Hey, I've got a headache," you can say 1 to 10. We try to put some objective measure to it, but someone's 10 is very different between another person's 10. And so when we're looking at anxiety, we're looking at signs and symptoms. We're looking at that duration, that intensity, and the frequency of those signs and symptoms, and seeing if they're occurring, over several days or in particular situations, looking at patterns of behavior to decide if something is truly anxiety or if it's just stress or if it's worry, which also have some different steps that we take to kind of help remediate those things. But just understand signs and symptoms. And then it's obviously, like we talked about, it's part of this evolutionary byproduct of our body's defense system that's been around with us forever. We tend to think that we are very evolved and that we can manage all these things. But the truth is, we have very poor adaptive skills when it comes to managing a lot of this unconscious emotional stuff. Emotions are almost always going to dominate logic, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that is. But essentially, what happens when we experience this physiological distress in our body, you get a fight, flight, or freeze. So just, high level fight is, all right, you move towards the thing, you're going to fight it. Flight is back out of there, and freeze is you just stand still and see what happens before you make a decision. So very different reactions when we flee or freeze. We get cortisol and we get adrenaline, and that kind of helps everything go into action and get out of there as quickly as possible. When you fight, you also get dopamine, along with some cortisol, but adrenaline. And so that creates a very different neural pathway. And so what we're going to talk about a little bit later is we're trying to get people to fight back against their anxiety when it truly is anxiety. Most of the time, people are going to flee or they're going to freeze. I've had clients who would get called upon in class and they would just sit there and they wouldn't say anything. So that's an example of them freezing. And some people would flee. So some people may not even go to class that day if they're going to get called on. So you can see this play out in a lot of different ways. And then fight is, like I said, is moving towards this thing that is this distress that you're going to say, all right, I'm not going to give into it when it comes, anxiety. We make sure it's not worry because we don't necessarily want to fight against things when they're worries. But if it's anxiety, what we're trying to get you to do is fight, move towards the thing that's telling you to move away. All this comes about through one trial learning or an accumulation of events leading to negative feedback loops. So one trial learning could be your kiddo could see someone in class raise their hand, they get the answer wrong, and someone makes fun of them. So immediately they're associating this thing happened, this was the consequence of that thing happening. I don't want to experience that. It's also as simple as maybe you're walking down the street and you see someone bit by a dog, particularly when your brain is forming, when you're younger, and you may associate that dogs are dangerous and therefore I don't want to even come close to a dog. What happens over time is, there's a dog on the other side of the street, so I'm going to stay on this side of the street. Or I'm not going to go outside eventually if, I think there could be a dog on the street. And so anxiety over time just kind of slowly erodes, this concept of this one trial learning by giving a false narrative that these things could happen. And if they do, that would be bad for you. And then the accumulation of events leading to a negative feedback loop is, you use the dog story. You may hear different things about dogs. It may show up in your feed. You may see it on the news. You may hear about it from a friend. And so over time, you begin to associate that a dog, or even maybe even a particular breed of dog, or a particular breed of dog in that neighborhood is dangerous. And so, not that it's a worry because you have no proof that that is actually true. You just create different associations over time that give you that feedback loop that tells you, this dog or all dogs are dangerous. So, pretty cool stuff when it comes to our brain. And, this makes a lot of sense. So, if stuff happens, the brain is going to hold on to that information. That's why it's so much harder to remember positive things than it is negative things. And so, the classic tell five positive things to erode the one negative thing that happens. All this is based upon evolutionary development, in that you'd want to remember if something bad happened, the brain would want to store that, therefore you don't do that, or you don't put someone else in harm's way. And so doing the one thing the one time gets encoded into the brain, and that way the brain over time can just kind of chunk it and not have to think so much about what it's doing. So take handwriting for an instance. Like, over time you don't have to think about how the pencil, the pen, crayon, whatever, and very slowly, how to start writing letters and then form sentences, and then, you can create paragraphs, so on and so on. That's what the brain is doing, but it's doing it at a much higher pace when it comes to negative things that we're experiencing. So what happens, it's kind of what we talked about as far as with anxiety. You get a cue, and then you get this narrative in your brain, and the narrative is just a story that if this happens, then this will happen, right? So it's a kind of cause and effect. And so you start constructing a false premise about a situation. So it could be if I raise my hand in class and get the answer wrong, people will laugh at me, and then I won't have any friends. And while that may seem silly, if you start believing that narrative and you don't tell anyone about that narrative, and then you don't start raising your hand, before long in that particular class or all of school, like, you now believe this because it's been sewed into you, kind of like braiding something, that is now a narrative or a neural pathway that you've created. And so that's how you start operating. So, I can't do it in this one place. And before long, that one place may become a lot of places over time. And so it just spins out of control based upon false information that feels very powerful and feels very vulnerable and feels very dangerous. Um, and so the mind trick to think is you're doing a good thing, right? Like, okay, this doesn't feel good. I don't like this sensation in my body, this physiological sensation. So I will move away from it so I don't feel it. And by doing that, you get dopamine, and dopamine's, pushing you into action. And in this way, it's kind of pushing you into the wrong action, but it isn't really any different. And so if you keep doing that, you're going to get more of that, and it pushes you farther and farther away from doing the thing that you need to do, like raise your hand, or get on a plane, or go, be around a dog, whatever the case may be. Anxiety is getting you to do or not do the thing that you probably should be doing because it's creating a lot of distress. And over time, that distress becomes more powerful and a lot heavier. And so therefore, it's a lot harder to challenge, particularly probably when the time we would see clients in the practice. And that's why, just the simple advice of, like, don't worry about it, don't think about it, it's not a big deal, people don't care. It's called cruel optimism, which is like, here's this one solution, here's this one thing. And to someone that has anxiety, that's just tough one. It just bounces off of them. Like, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand what it's like. They can't feel this. They don't know how dangerous or vulnerable this would put me in. And so therefore, they're not going to take the risk. So we talked a little bit about this, but to get a cue, the cue could be something internal, external. Internal, it's just feeling that distress, rising up, more likely from the amygdala. External could be something that's going on around you. We can use that classroom setting as an example. And so it creates these thoughts or these physical sensations that can kind of go either way. And so that creates all that distress in our system. And a lot of times people are uncomfortable with that distress, so they want to move away from it. So they move away from it. As this example is, they won't talk to someone, they won't introduce themselves to someone, they won't put themselves out there. Maybe they won't even try something new. A lot of this can sometimes present itself as perfectionism. So I don't want to put myself out there if I can't do well. And that comes from an internal place, or they feel like, there's a value judgment externally if they don't do well. And so they're going to move away from that distress because it's uncomfortable. And so they want to kind of get back to this comfortable state. And so what happens is they get this little reward because they were able to move away, kind of like put out the little fire. But what happens over time is you're actually creating a bigger fire. So you start making these little deals with yourself. And you don't always do this purposely, consciously. Sometimes it's just unconsciously. And before too long, before I guess caregivers or us as the therapists start noticing, it's already developed pretty good pathway. It's like someone secretly learning to write with their right hand, and you want them to be left-handed, and before long, they've never been using the right hand and they're only using their left. That's a neural pathway. A left-handed writer is a neural pathway development. If you want to write with your right hand, you kind of conceptually understand how to do it, but you'd actually have to go to pen to paper to develop that pathway. And so that's what anxiety is doing in a negative, bad way. And so the more likely to do something is because you have done it before. And that just is normal automated behavior for the brain. Same reason that going back to the left hand or the left hand example of it just allows us to evolve and get better and better and better because we're able to automate some of those things. And that's what anxiety is doing. It's just automating this belief system and turning that into behavior. And then those behaviors reinforce that belief system, which then gets more and more entrenched. And so it's harder for us to get out of it. Remember, if you have questions, just put it in the chat. So things that obviously can impact our anxiety, and in a lot of instances, kind of impact our mental health altogether. Sleep is the biggest thing. If you've ever heard me speak, I'm going to just hammer sleep. We don't get enough sleep. Our kiddos don't get enough sleep. The statistics on that range from anywhere from 70 to 95% of our teenagers don't get enough sleep if they go to CMS. Probably don't get enough sleep because they're waking up at 6, maybe at the latest, and I doubt they went to bed at 9 the night before because they're up doing homework and other things. So we need to have more sleep, and not getting enough sleep is the foundation that you're going to build everything else off of, whether it's, how you eat, what your dopamine levels are like. So everything revolves around sleep. There's one person that if you can mute your phone, please. This is iPhone 300. Lack of experience, experiencing hard efforts in any domain. So, if you're not used to putting yourself out there, even that's internally or externally, then it's just going to get harder and harder if anxiety comes along. It's just more of a challenge. Our over reliance on technology, we have a whole another talk about just technology and the rise around a lot of the mental health issues that we're seeing. But sometimes if you're using technology just to remove yourself from the distress, you are not learning how to get into the moment. And so, not that all technology is bad or, any particular technology is bad. It's just understanding that sometimes having it is a lifeline that maybe otherwise we shouldn't have, and that would put us more into action. Sexism, like I talked about, another word for that could be grit. So a lot of times people that have a lot of grit, they go hard, they want the best for themselves. It's not necessarily about, accomplishing things for other people, but it's just they want to go and go and go. And so it's a beautiful characteristic for people. The problem is if you don't know when to pull back on that, or if you don't know when to stop, then it can create anxiety because what it would look like it is, well, did you study enough? Did you study a little bit more? Did you read everything you should have read? Maybe there are things you forgot about that you could go double check. And this would also be the night before the test. And that kiddo could have an A in the class. They could have made a 9 or above on every test. Anxiety is going to tell them that if particularly if you have that perfectionistic quality, if you didn't do enough, there's always more to do. You have other mental health challenges, other health challenges, that's going to exacerbate anxiety, make you more vulnerable to anxiety. Your role models, such as your family, and genetics play a part in this. So, unfortunately, and unfortunately, we are a product of our caregivers and our parents. And so if they had anxiety and they're a tree, then you're more susceptible to anxiety. And then how our family systems and our social circles mirror anxiety. and how they manage that anxiety and what becomes exasperated or how it becomes mitigated. So, this is a common meme. Anxiety says, what if this happens to me? But it won't. Anxiety, but what if it does? And then, hey, you got me. And that's what anxiety does. It creates a shadow of doubt, and it wants you to believe that anything is possible. And therefore, you should or shouldn't act depending on what the thing it is that you're trying to do. We're going to talk more about these things over here on the left, as far as ways to fight back against anxiety. So we're going to cover the emotional temperature, the relationship of human condition and environment, the decision tree, which if you've worked in the practice or been a client or a caregiver, I'm sure you've heard of that. And then how to make a decision about whether to fight it or not, and then tools like we talked about. So we talk a lot about emotional temperature in the office. It's usually the second session where you'll hear about this. Sometimes if you're an adult, we may get to it in the first session, but essentially all it is as our temperature rises, our emotional temperature rises, our ability to manage that situation, our prefrontal cortex, we'll just call it IQ, gets diminished. And so if you just think of a scale 1 to 10, and 10 represents this person blowing their head off, and 10 is also optimal IQ, as that temperature rises, your IQ drops. And so anxiety will come in and certainly disrupt the brain's ability to manage the situation. That's why a lot of times you'll see people just kind of panic, go into that freeze, they'll flee. That's why the reason why if someone yells fire, you're more likely to go out of the door that you came in, even and if there is a higher probability that the fire is there, just because the brain is not able to process new information, it's using old information. Um, and so as that rises, the IQ drops, like I said, you drop up to 30 to 40 points. Very significant, obviously, because most of our IQs are somewhere between, 100, 105, 110. And so you're not processing information very well. You're just reacting. And so a lot of times in the second session, we're just trying to give you a framework to understand, what is your number right now? If your number is a 5 or a 6 and you're about to give this talk, well, that's probably in line with what it should be. If it's a 10, that's not the place you want to be, because you're not probably going to be able to really pull up new information. You may just be reading from a cue card or something like that. And so we're working with people and getting the temperature down if it's too high. But also understanding that where the temperature is maybe where it should be given the environment. And
Hey,
so if
hey,
y'all
Trent,
could,
I was just
yeah,
wondering, I think as a leader, you might be able to mute everybody's lines and then we can
I
unmute if we
can.
want to speak. No?
Yeah, for whatever reason, I agree. For whatever reason, I'm not the host, so it won't let me do it. But I do appreciate that suggestion. So if anyone is unmuted, if you can mute yourself, that would be awesome, please. So human condition and environment. If you think of kindergarten and you've got the carpet where everyone sits down and everyone's sitting there listening to the teacher, could be story time, and you've got one kid that's just kind of running around the room, maybe they're in the cubbies, they're just having a hard time sitting still. Those two places, human condition and environment, are playing out at the same time. So the environment is saying, hey, lights are off, we're quiet, we're settling in, and most people will capitulate to that environment. But if someone has a human condition that is stronger than that environment, let's say they have ADHD, then they're up to moving around and they're not conforming to the environment. And so anxiety is the same way. Like you could have a very hospitable environment in your house. It could be in the classroom, it could be the school itself, it could be the soccer field, the coach, whatever it may be. Like the environment could be set up for optimization, and most people are doing well in that environment. Human condition comes in, and we'll use anxiety as our example here. Human condition comes in and says, I don't really care about the environment. It still looks unsafe to me. I'm still not going to raise my hand. I'm still not going to go try out for the soccer team. Or if I try out for the soccer team, I'm not going to try to score because if I miss, people will be disappointed with me. Or if I'm on the basketball court, I'm always going to pass, never shoot. It'll show up in a lot of different ways, even though the coach is supportive, the team is supportive, the teacher, whatever environment you want to impose there, the human condition, anxiety, is so much stronger than the environment in those situations. That's why it's hard to talk someone out of that anxious moment, um, even though the environment, you've done everything there is to do the right way. So that's why a lot of stuff we're going to talk about with this is, using the right context, using the right words, helping people know when to try something, when to pull away. And instead of like, all right, just get out there and we're going to call on you every day, and we're just going to desensitize you to this problem. That doesn't necessarily work with anxiety, because a lot of times people say, let's take this talk for instance, like, I'll just get through this, right? I'll just get through it, and it'll be uncomfortable and I won't like it, but then it'll be over, and then I won't have to do it ever again. So it doesn't really change brain chemistry when you're just saying, I'll get through it, or I'm just gonna, for lack of better words, I'm just gonna throw you in the pool and you're gonna learn to swim. The anxiety doesn't create new pathways in that environment. So this has to come from an internal human condition, and we have to have a good environment that allows them to be able to take risks over time. So decision tree is, it's pretty basic. You come to this fork in the road, you get two options. And so if someone's experiencing anxiety or using words that sound like anxiety, we'll clarify, like, all right, well, let's make sure this isn't a worry. Let's make sure we don't need to go over here to the left, problem solve, and come up with some solutions to that problem. So we're going to make sure it's not a worry, because we don't want to discount something and call it anxiety if it's truly a problem. And so we need to make sure present day that this is not a worry. And so we clear that up. All right, not a worry. Okay, so we're not going down the left lane here. We're going to go to the right. And the right is anxiety. So anxiety means that there are no facts and data to support that this problem is present currently, or that it needs your attention now. Yes, someone could be, getting poor grades 2 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now. But as we currently sit here, their grades are good. They're doing what they need to do. They've been doing their homework, and they don't need to do above and beyond more than what they're doing. And so then it's anxiety. So once we go down to the right side to anxiety, we give them two options, and so the two options are, we're going to move away from it. And that's, fleeing, and that works. We just don't want to do that all the time. Because then, like I said, then we learn that, all right, I feel this thing, I don't like it, I'm just going to go listen to music. It could be something really healthy. I'm going to go read a book. I'm just going to go do some exercises. I'll do some push-ups, whatever it may be. Sounds like really healthy stuff. You're just doing it for the wrong reasons, so it creates the wrong pathway. So you're associating to this distress the wrong way. And so we'll develop the tools to help us learn to pull away from that anxiety, while also saying the second option here is that, we're going to come up with a way, given a safe environment, for you to challenge this anxiety. So if it's raise the hand, for instance, we're going to pick a class that's your best class, that you're the best, you have best opportunity to get this right. And we're going to talk to the teacher. And when you put a paperclip on the desk, or if you even, go so bold to raise your hand, the teacher's going to call on you, because they know that you know the answer. So the risk of getting it wrong is really, really low. It may not be 100%. Like I said, you're never going to get to 100% usually with anxiety, but you'll create an environment and then allow the person to challenge themselves slowly. Like someone that's afraid of water, you just slowly walk in. Maybe you just go to the pool the first day. But with the example of social anxiety, and I don't want to raise my hand because people make fun of me, you create an environment and then you learn to fight. So you push into that distress, which gives you a really good chemical dopamine, adrenaline, neural pathway development. And then you just learn over time that you can do that in that particular class. And then you extrapolate it to other things. It could be another class, it could be another social situation. So you're now building up some equity in those decisions to say, like, all right, we did it here, you probably can do it here. Help me understand why you couldn't. And so you're using language and using questioning, like the Socratic method, to help them understand how they can push against their anxiety. And that if that the temperature gets too high, if it gets to 8, 9, or 10, we want them to then, that's when you watch YouTube or listen to music or do push-ups, so you can get that number down. And then maybe you come back to it. Maybe you do this 5 minutes a day. And so 5 minutes is a big deal if you haven't been doing it at all. And so it's all baby steps to move into this kind of move towards the right and learn how to challenge that anxiety and that narrative. And it has to come internally because they're the ones that have to believe it, even though, externally, the caregivers, the therapists, whoever, are kind of like cheerleaders saying, you can do this. There's no reason you can do this. And you're proving why that is true. So basically, what anxiety wants you to do is keep you in limbo. Well, maybe, I don't know, could be, are you sure? Maybe we shouldn't. And anytime you're in limbo, anxiety loves it because it means it's creating more weight and it's creating more of a super highway as far as a pathway development goes. So it becomes harder and harder to actually get into action. And so the decision tree is all about getting out of limbo. Like it's either a worry or it's anxiety. And the anxiety, we're either going to attack it or we're going to move away from it. Those are kind of the three options. And we don't kind of ruminate and go around in these circles that anxiety wants us to and say, all right, well, what do you want to do? We got to do something. So we're either going to go here or go there. I mean, parents are usually pretty good about this. It's like, here are your two options. We're going to Chick-fil-A or we're going to McDonald's. All right. You can get chicken nuggets, you can get a burger. Like, what Happy Meal do you want? And so we're doing that because the brain is really good at doing binary things. It's like, all right, good or bad, salt, sweet, Carolina Duke if you're, basketball. But picking one or the other and then chunking that information and then going. And so that's all the decision tree and the proven process is trying to do is like, we're not going to stay in this limbo place. We're going to do something. And with our help, caregivers help, we're going to push you in one of those directions. Another thing that works really well, and this is true for anything, like as far as buffers go against anxiety, is sleep. Like I said, they need 8 to 10 hours of sleep. For anybody's kiddo that's on here, we need 7 to 8, closer to 8. I know everyone says, "Well, I can get by with this or that." The research just says fundamentally that's not true. Getting by is not being optimal. And so there's a lot of loss when we don't do things and go to bed at the same time and get up around the same time. Trying to get sunshine. We are not the majority, but we are trending towards being vitamin D deficient. I think it's around 37, 38% right now. So we're not getting enough sunshine. And it's important to get that sunshine in the morning. I know this is hard for high schoolers, but sunshine in the morning for 10 to 15 minutes direct, not looking directly at the sun, but just direct, and get in the afternoon. We want to drink enough water, have the right diet that's right for us. You want to do things that are hard effort, and exercise could be hard effort. Doing school is hard effort. But also things that could be challenging. It could be a puzzle. It could be anything that takes some effort. You want to do things that you're passionate about. A lot of kids have hobbies, but there's a lot of kids whose hobbies are dropping off, and those hobbies are becoming more technology. While that could be, they could be coding, they could be doing TikToks, they could be making YouTube content. That is something they're passionate about. So you kind of have to work through that to see, what that looks like and how much time they spend on it, how healthy is it. But it's important to do things that you're passionate about. And it's very important to have social relationships that have high reciprocity. So people that are supportive. A lot of times, if anybody's familiar with the Dunbar number, it's small number, 5 people, then it goes 10, and then it goes, the farther out you go, the harder it is to remember who is who. And a lot of times with this generation, they're paying attention to the 500 and the 1500 who are acquaintances or people they barely know. And they're feeling like those people are just as important as their 5 or 10 or 50. And so they're weighting those people more importantly or the same as people that are closer to the circle. And so it's just not possible to keep up one with all those relationships. And I know it's probably easier for people that have grown up without the phone to say, well, it's not that important. You really know them. How important is that? To the young people, it's very important. And so you want to be able to focus on the 5, the 10, the 50, and weight them more from a social reciprocity standpoint. And that way you're drawing, hopefully it's the right circles, but you're drawing more oxytocin, more of those good chemicals from that group than the people that you barely know who are more casual in their comments and care less about those people. So all those things make up a healthy human, and they're great buffers against anxiety and truly anything. But doing those 8 things, and then if you take medication or supplements, also having that as part of your regimen is a great buffer. So, we've talked about tools, and the way I want you to think about this is like mediate and modulate. The decision tree, um, and the emotional temperature and all those things I just described, that's a way to modulate. So mediate is if you have a headache, you'll go take an ibuprofen, and it'll make the headache go away. Now, next day you have a headache, take ibuprofen, maybe it goes away, maybe it comes back. But if you just keep taking ibuprofen and every time you have a headache and never really address why you have a headache, all you're doing is mediating the problem, right? Versus modulating is something that you can do that takes more time, and time could be months and months and months, but takes more time. And over time, you're going to experience less of these fires that tools help with to kind of mediate the little fires. So decision tree, emotional temperature, having a system that you can check in on your stress level and then intervene on that stress level if it's out of whack, that is modulating. The mediating is stuff that we can use to move ourselves away from that distress, as long as it is we're doing it in a healthy way. So get moving, just simply me standing up in the chair if I stood up right now, it's changed into scenery. And so that's a really big impact. It just changes our cognitive approach in that moment. Humor helps a lot. Prayer of any whatever religion denomination you are. Prayer is also very helpful. It allows you to feel like you're never alone, like you always have someone to speak to, and be heard. And that's obviously very important for anyone in their mental health. Ask for help. I think a lot of people are doing a really good job asking for help now. But a lot of times, this can feel private and this can feel embarrassing. And it oftentimes feels like you're the only one that experiences it. And just by voicing it, whether it's at the school counselor or with us or your parents or whoever, that's a huge step to getting help and kind of not necessarily reversing the narrative that you start, but just building a new narrative in your brain. So we're building new roadways in your brain, no different than if you're a left-handed, we're going to start to teach you how to be right-handed. And that's all we're trying to do is respond differently to that distress that you're going to experience, because we don't get to control that part. We get to control the narrative after that. So asking for help is a nice way to start building that new narrative. All the breathing techniques, if I just told you right now to stop and breathe in for 3 seconds and breathe out for 3 seconds, or just pay attention to your breath, that is a breathing technique. So it's bringing attention to your breath, your body, and it's taking your mind away from wherever it was. I mean, just like if I said, think of a red apple, now I want you to think of two breaths all the way in and one breath out. That's a breathing technique. The one that we teach the most, the double breath at the practice is, and I'll demonstrate it, but it's taking in two or one deep breath and then another short breath and then breathing out through the mouth. So I had a friend this weekend. We were up on a mountain range and his adrenaline was too high because it was kind of sketchy. And so I said, all right, let's sit down. We're just going to do the double breath. So his sympathetic nervous system, the nervous system that says, hey, we got a problem here, get me the heck out of here. We needed it to calm down because there wasn't an option just to get out of there. We were on top of a mountain. And so doing that will mostly shut off your sympathetic nervous system and turn on your parasympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic, if you just think of it, if you've been on a trip, on a vacation, and you've come home and maybe noticed that your nails have grown, that's your parasympathetic nervous system. It's the thing operating in the background. It helps control your digestion, fingernail growth, hair growth, a lot of different things. It's the thing that's just kind of keeping everything running. And then the sympathetic nervous system shuts all that down for the most part because you need to kind of pay attention to the threat. And so a lot of resources get devoted to those things that are meant to keep you alive. Breathing techniques are a way to shut that down. But the double breath is it's a deep breath in, so you go, and so you're putting as much oxygen in your lungs as humanly possible through those two breathing techniques or through those two breaths. And so it's just tricking the brain saying, hey, we're okay because you're taking two breaths instead of the one breath in, one breath out, one breath in, one breath out. All the relaxation techniques work. So yoga, meditation, yoga nidra, progressive muscle relaxation. You can find all those. We have some of those on our site, but you can find all that stuff on YouTube. It's free. Mindfulness, we've got mindfulness techniques, but basically you just kind of lump all this stuff and it's meant to give attention to someplace other than your sympathetic nervous system and your anxiety telling you that something is wrong. Sit outside is great. If you go outside in nature with a friend, like those three things alone are going to help your mental health immensely and certainly help your anxiety. Pain relievers actually work. The place in your brain where you have physical pain, the emotional center of pain is right next to it. So, like I said, this is mediating. This is something you want to do every day, and you're not going to feel like this huge bump of relief, but it will help with some of those things. And then time on devices. Like I said, you can use devices, and there's a lot of good things about devices that we can use to help us with that distress if that number is too high, right? So if you're checking in, like, all right, my number's an 8, and you're sitting in the lunchroom or you're just sitting with a colleague, it doesn't matter, how old you are, and your number's an 8, and there's no reason for it being an 8. This is where you'd want to do one of these tools to bring that number down to a scale that is appropriate given the environment. So oftentimes we are misreading the environment and saying, well, I shouldn't feel this bad. And so it's true that you given the environment, you probably should be feeling that way. You just don't want it to get too high where your mind is not able to really process information. So anything above an 8, 9, or 10, we want to start using these tools. But you could feel some stress if you're about to give a talk or if you're about to maybe answer a question in class and you have some social anxiety. Those are all normal things. The other things that work really well, obviously exercise, like we talked about. Power walking, jogging, cycling, getting rid of that zone two. Not that we have to get like too much into physio, but like just getting your heart rate up a little bit, a couple of times a week. That has really good outcomes, really good research on that. Practicing gratitude is one way that takes you out of you being the center of the focus and making it more about someone else. So you can think of a way that you've done something for someone else, their reaction to it. You really want to think about that in detail. It must be like a story, um, or something that you've done for them. So vice versa, and their reaction to it. So when we are able to do that, the research on this is really strong. That when we're able to make it not about us and think about how we impacted someone else or how they impacted us, that it has powerful neural pathways that we can develop that can counteract that anxiety pathway. So like I said, these are all tools that you can use in that moment. Like I need to kind of get out of this mental headspace that I'm in. And sometimes that's changing environment. Sometimes it is changing the environment in your brain. So it's a really cool opportunity to practice that. And then stress, see it as stress is agnostic, which means it's neutral. See it as an opportunity to change. See it as an opportunity to move forward, literally or figuratively. And by doing that, you're doing something hard. So like this person doing, push-ups the whole time I've been talking, like they're getting stronger, even though it hurts and is ripping their muscles apart. We have to think about this psychologically the same way. Like, yeah, this is hard, but this is me doing something different, and it's going to pay off in the long run. Could be months and months and months and months from now, but it's going to improve quality of life. And you just have to help the person to see the next step, not what it's going to look like when it's over. And that all comes back to that kind of duration, pathway, and outcome. Like, all right, we're going to practice this for 5 minutes. This is what it's going to look like. And the outcome is that you have done it, not that, the world has changed or that, no one laughed at you or one person laughed at you. It's just that you're going to raise your hand. This is how you're going to do it. This is how we're setting it up. And the outcome is that you did it. And that is your success. You don't tie it to much more than that. And most people can get to, yeah, I'll do that one time. Not that we're going to do it one time for the next month. Just like, let's do it one time between now and then, or 5 minutes each day between now and then. Most of us could probably practice if I said, hey, I want you to try to meditate for 10 seconds each day. Most people would buy into that. And then we could go up from there depending on how that goes. That's the same thing we're doing with anxiety. That's pretty much it. I'm happy to answer any questions. Y'all can unmute yourself or even put it in the chat. These are two books we have. The one on anxiety, if you've been here before, that one's been around a little bit. And then we have a new one about just stress, which kind of go, in conjunction with the anxiety piece. But, they're free. They will ask for your email address. Most of you are probably on the newsletter, and that's how you knew about this talk anyway. But all we're doing is collecting that for our newsletter. We're not doing anything else with those emails. We're not giving them to anyone or selling or any of that stuff. So it's protected, I promise, and we won't bother you. And you can opt out anytime you don't want to be on the newsletter. And then the last thing is we are doing a parenting workshop. There's a cost associated with it. If you're interested, and we'll be sending all this out after this too, so you don't have time to scan this. But we're going to do that a couple of Saturdays this fall. So if you're interested in that, you can scan there, or you can go to the website and learn more about it. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm a social worker, so I'm often working with people around anxiety, and I work in the public health department. So a lot of the time, the anxiety is related to medical conditions, or the fear of how medical conditions may progress. Can you give just sort of like advice and examples of like using these tools, like specifically, because we had a lot of classroom examples and things like that, but maybe more related to medical concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd want to make sure that it's not a worry first when it comes to that medical stuff. Um, Depending on the presentation. I mean, do you have an example? Because like I said, I want to rule that out first and and normalize some of what they're feeling while still using those tools to manage that stress number as it's climbing. Because of course that's only exacerbate their health issues. Um, but I would rule that out first. If you have an example, I'd be happy to give more detail.
Yeah, like I don't know, like we have a maternal health clinic, so sometimes there are fertility issues. We
Mhm.
also have people that maybe have like lab tests done and they're waiting on the results and they're concerned about what the results will be, things like that.
Yeah, those are great. Um, it's using that decision period. So as we speak right now, is there a concern when it comes to the fertility? Or is there a concern like right now, what data and information do we have about this test? And fertility can be part of that too. Um, and there's all this space in between when you took it to when you get it. And that's where anxiety loves to live because it's creating all these different scenarios. And so now we get to go Google everything to see about the 103 different things it could be. And so in that instance, when it's anxiety, because you have to say, well, this is anxiety, if we'll deal with the worry if there is something inclusive with the test. Um, you can either say, all right, we're going to move away from this, we're not even going to think about this, or we're going to sit here and allow ourselves just to feel uncertainty until, and we'll let our temperature go up a little bit, knowing that we can manage this and pull away from it anytime we want. And so you're stepping into that environment that allows for you to have some uncertainty without needing the answers. And then when that environment gets too great on a temperature, emotional temperature level, then you'll do something to, in a sense, distract yourself. And anytime that anxiety comes back up, if you've decided, like, I'm not going to think about this or feel this until, I'll just make it up, like 7:30 tonight, then you have to use those skills to say, all right, it's going to want to pull me over there because this feels like a threat. So that goes back to that unconscious um, brain just saying like, all right, this is what we're doing. This is what we're thinking about. And so cognitively, you're like, well, that's not what I'm doing. And so you would have a couple of things in place that you would do. Like, so I'm going to do this specific thing and watch this specific thing on YouTube, or I'll use this specific gratitude journal, or I'm going to talk to this specific person. So all those are meant to pull yourself away. So anxiety is not continuing to have you ruminate and stay in that limbo. Because that's what, I mean, that's essentially what limbo is when you're waiting on a test result.
That's helpful. Thank you so much.
Sure. Any other questions? For anybody that's watching this recorded version, you can just go to the website, click on the email for the company, just my email. If you have questions, feel free to put them in there. And you obviously can talk if any of y'all were a client or the caregiver, you also can talk to your clinician about it too. Everyone uses this, process, this proven process of the decision free and emotional temperature. And We try to tailor the tools, obviously, that fit you or your child, that work for you, and also that isn't creating bad habits, creating another monster down the road, of we're only going to watch YouTube, that kind of thing. But I appreciate everyone being here, and just keep your eyes out for the next one. I think we'll have another one in 4 to 6 weeks. Different topic, obviously, and so everyone have a great day. Thanks.